The rising sun bathed the beach of Coral Cove in golden hues as Iris Reynolds watched the horizon from her inn's balcony. At 55, she had built her small seaside empire after leaving the hustle and bustle of Charleston. The Seabreeze Inn was known throughout the region as a haven of peace, with its wooden chalets scattered among coconut trees and a meticulously maintained tropical garden. On that September morning, however, Iris's usual tranquility was replaced by an uneasiness she couldn't explain. "Good morning, Mom," Caleb, her youngest son, interrupted her thoughts. At 28, he was responsible for the inn's administration, while his older sister Rachel lived in New York City, working as an executive for a multinational corporation. "Good morning, son," Iris tried to smile, but her gaze remained distant. "You're worried about Horizon Development's proposal, aren't you?" Caleb asked, leaning on the balcony railing. Horizon Developments was a large real estate developer that had arrived in Coral Cove 6 months prior, buying beachfront properties to build an immense resort. Theo Montgomery, the company's charming and persuasive expansion director, had made a generous offer for the Seabreeze Inn, an offer many would consider irresistible. "I can't accept the idea of seeing all this transformed into just another impersonal resort," Iris replied, her gaze sweeping over the inn's grounds that had been her home for 2 decades. "But I also can't ignore that the money would be security for us, especially for you and your sister." Caleb sighed, running a hand through his dark hair that was beginning to show a few silver strands, an early inheritance from his father. "Mom, we've talked about this. The inn is profitable. It's growing every year. We don't need to sell for security." Iris's cell phone rang, interrupting their conversation. It was Rachel, her older daughter. Iris answered, putting it on speakerphone. "Mom, I'm at the airport. I'll arrive in Coral Cove on the 2 o'clock flight," Rachel announced, her voice conveying the efficiency that had characterized her since childhood. "Daughter, I didn't expect you so soon. I thought you'd only come next week for us to discuss the proposal. I decided we need to resolve this quickly, Mom. Horizon won't wait forever. And honestly, I think we should accept the offer." Caleb rolled his eyes. It was always like this. Rachel would come from New York City with her ideas of progress and efficiency, wanting to decide about the inn he managed daily. "We'll talk when you arrive," Iris replied diplomatically. "Caleb will pick you up at the airport." After she hung up, Iris saw her son's displeased expression. "Please, son, try not to argue with your sister this time. Mom, she barely comes here twice a year and thinks she can decide the inn's fate. That's not fair. Your sister is also part of this family. She has a right to her opinion." The rest of the morning passed with Caleb supervising the pool maintenance, while Iris checked the reservations for the upcoming holiday. The inn was fully booked for October, as it was every year. Loyal tourists returned annually, many since its inauguration. At 2 o'clock, Caleb drove to the small regional airport to pick up his sister. He found Rachel in the arrivals area, impeccable in her navy blue pantsuit, her dark brown hair tied in a perfect bun, contrasting with her brother's relaxed clothes. "You could at least try to dress like an inn manager and not a surfer," was Rachel's greeting. "I missed you too, little sister," Caleb replied ironically, taking the rolling suitcase she carried. On the way to the inn, the silence in the car was broken only by the sound of the radio playing bossa nova. Rachel checked messages on her phone, while Caleb drove with his eyes fixed on the road. "You've already convinced Mom to refuse the proposal, haven't you?" Rachel finally asked, putting away her phone. "I don't need to convince anyone. She knows the sentimental value the inn holds. This is where we grew up, Rachel. It was her fresh start after the separation. Sentimentality doesn't pay for retirement, Caleb. Mom is almost 60. With the money from the sale, she could live peacefully forever, maybe even move closer to me in New York City. And you really think she'd be happy in an apartment in New York City, away from the sea?" Upon arriving at the inn, they were greeted by Iris at the entrance. Rachel hugged her mother for a long time, noticing that she seemed thinner and her gray hairs more abundant since her last visit at Christmas. "Let's go inside." "Lunch is ready," Iris said, leading her children into the main house. A charming building with panoramic sea views. During lunch, they avoided talking about the purchase proposal, focusing instead on Rachel's news from New York City. She spoke about her work as a marketing manager, promotion possibilities, her new apartment. Caleb ate in silence, occasionally looking out the window at the sea. It was only when Mrs. Zelda, the inn's cook for 15 years, served dessert that the conversation inevitably returned to the subject hanging over them. "Theo Montgomery called this morning," Iris said, playing with her spoon in the pudding cup. "He wants to schedule a meeting for tomorrow. He said he has news about the proposal." Rachel straightened in her chair. "That's great, Mum. I think we should hear what he has to say." "Of course you do," Caleb murmured. "What did you say, little brother?" Rachel shot him a challenging look. "I said, of course you want to sell everything to that playboy Theo Montgomery. You probably don't even care about the impact a resort of that size will have on the beach, on the people who live here, on our employees. Don't be dramatic. Horizon Developments is offering jobs to all the inn's employees at the new resort. As for the beach, they have environmental certifications. They follow sustainability protocols." Iris raised her hands, asking for peace. "Please, let's hear what Theo has to say tomorrow. Then we'll make a decision together, as a family." What none of them knew was that at that exact moment, Theo Montgomery was observing the Seabreeze Inn from the deck of his yacht, anchored in the bay. Beside him, an older man examined the location through binoculars. "That's it, Dad. The only property left for us to complete the resort project. Edward Montgomery, CEO of Horizon Developments and Theo's father, lowered the binoculars and smiled. "Iris Reynolds. After all these years, you know the owner of the inn?" Theo asked, surprised. "Oh, yes," Edward replied with a strange glint in his eye. "We know each other very well. A long time ago." The next morning, the sky over Coral Cove was overcast. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, announcing the possibility of a tropical storm. Iris watched the movement of the waves from her usual balcony, a cup of coffee in her hands, when Caleb appeared for breakfast. "Looks like heavy rain is coming," he commented, serving himself a slice of cornbread. "Yes, I'm worried about the group of tourists who arrived yesterday for the boat trip. I'll call Jonathan to cancel today's trip." Jonathan was responsible for the boat trips offered by the inn, one of the most popular attractions, taking tourists to nearby islands and for diving in crystal-clear waters. Rachel appeared on the balcony, already dressed in smart casual attire, ready for the meeting with Theo Montgomery, scheduled for 10 in the morning. "Good morning. Mom, can we review the inn's documents before the meeting? I want to be prepared for any proposal." "Of course, daughter. They're in the office. Caleb, are you coming too?" "I can't. I have to sort out the boat trip cancellation and reschedule for the guests." "You and Rachel can handle Theo," he replied, barely disguising his displeasure. While Iris and Rachel discussed financial details in the inn's small office, Caleb instructed the staff on measures for the approaching storm. Mrs. Zelda prepared more coffee, and Paul the gardener collected the garden furniture. Precisely at 10 o'clock, a black executive car parked in front of the Seabreeze Inn. Theo Montgomery stepped out of the vehicle, impeccable in his light linen suit, accompanied by an equally elegant older man. Caleb, returning from the garden, was the first to see them. "I didn't know you'd bring company," he said to Theo, extending his hand in a formal greeting. "Caleb, this is my father, Edward Montgomery, president of Horizon Developments," Theo introduced. He insisted on coming personally for this meeting. Edward shook Caleb's hand firmly, his eyes scanning the inn's structure with calculating interest. "Your family has built a charming place here." "Thank you. My mother dedicated her life to this place." When they entered the main house, Iris and Rachel were already waiting for them in the spacious living area that served as the inn's reception. Upon seeing Edward Montgomery, Iris visibly paled, her fingers tightly clutching the document folder she held. "Iris," Edward greeted her with a nod, a slight smile on his lips. "It's been a long time." "You know each other?" Rachel asked, looking confused from her mother to the man. "We were acquaintances in Charleston many years ago," Iris replied, regaining her composure. "Please sit down. Let's get to the matter that brings us here today." The five sat on the wicker sofas with colorful cushions that decorated the room. Mrs. Zelda brought a tray with coffee, water, and homemade cookies, casting a curious glance at the visitors before leaving. "As you know," Theo began, opening his folder, "Horizon Developments is developing the largest tourist complex ever seen in this part of Florida. The Dream Bay Eco Resort will be a benchmark in sustainable hospitality, combining luxury with environmental preservation. He spread architectural plans and project renderings on the coffee table. The planned resort was impressive, with apartment blocks, private villas, swimming pools, restaurants, and a convention center, all integrated into the natural landscape. We have already acquired all the necessary properties, except the Seabreeze Inn, Theo continued, and we are willing to improve our offer to conclude this deal. Rachel leaned forward to examine the documents, clearly impressed. Caleb remained aloof, his arms crossed defensively. Edward Montgomery, who had been observing Iris intently throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "Iris, I understand your attachment to this place. It's part of your history. But progress is inevitable. Coral Cove is no longer the fishing village you found when you arrived here. You seem to know a lot about my history," Iris commented, her tone cautiously neutral. "We researched thoroughly before making any acquisition proposal," Theo quickly intervened. "And we know that you built this business practically alone, raising your children here. And that's precisely why we can't just sell and leave," Caleb said, approaching. "This inn isn't just a business for us." "We understand perfectly," Edward said, leaning forward. "That's why we brought a different proposal today, one that we believe will serve everyone's interests." Edward took an envelope from his folder and handed it to Iris. "Instead of buying the property, we propose a partnership. The Seabreeze Inn would maintain its identity and independent management, but would be integrated into the resort complex as an exclusive boutique accommodation option." Iris opened the envelope, examining the documents with Rachel looking over her shoulder. As she read, her expression changed from surprise to skepticism. "This seems interesting," Iris said finally, "but we would need to analyze it carefully." "Of course," Edward replied, smiling. "We don't expect an immediate answer. But there's an additional detail I'd like to discuss. In private, if possible." Iris hesitated, then nodded. "Caleb, Rachel, could you give us a moment?" Rachel immediately agreed, standing up. Caleb, reluctant, shot a suspicious glance at Edward before following his sister out of the room. "You too, son?" Edward said to Theo, who seemed surprised but obeyed. When they were alone, a heavy silence hung between Iris and Edward. Outside, the wind began to pick up, announcing the approaching storm. "Why did you come back, Edward?" Iris asked finally. "After all these years." "Initially, I didn't know this land belonged to you," he replied, standing up to look out the window. "It was a coincidence, or perhaps fate if you believe in those things." "I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to you," she said, her tone hardening. "You always planned every step carefully." Edward turned to face her, a sad smile on his lips. "Iris, 30 years have passed. People change. Some people, perhaps. You built something admirable here," he said, changing the subject. "When I learned that you were the owner, I was impressed. The humble girl from Charleston I knew transformed into a successful businesswoman. It wasn't easy, especially at first, with 2 small children to raise alone." Edward's gaze intensified. "Your children? How old are they exactly?" "Rachel is 32 and Caleb 28, Iris replied, looking away. Edward quickly did a mental calculation, his expression subtly changing. "Caleb was born after you left Charleston then." Before Iris could answer, the door opened and Theo entered hurriedly. "Excuse the interruption, but the weather is worsening rapidly. If we're going back to the city before the storm, we need to go now." Edward seemed annoyed by the interruption, but nodded. "Of course, son. Iris, think about our proposal. We'll be in touch." When the 2 men left, Caleb and Rachel returned to the room, finding their mother standing by the window. Watching the car depart under the first drops of rain. "What did he want to talk about in private?" Rachel asked. "Nothing important," Iris replied without turning around. "Just memories of the past." Caleb watched his mother attentively. "Is there something you're not telling us, Mom?" Iris finally turned, her face composed in a mask of tranquility. "It's nothing, son. Now let's prepare for the storm. We have guests to take care of." As Caleb left to check the chalets, Rachel remained with her mother. "This partnership proposal, it's better than we expected. I think we should seriously consider it. Yes, we'll analyze it carefully in the coming days." Hours later, the storm hit Coral Cove with full force. The inn's guests were gathered in the main house, where they would be safer. Mrs. Zelda prepared a special dinner for everyone, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the tempest raging outside. At the city hotel where they were staying, Edward watched the storm from his suite window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Theo entered, shaking his head. "This storm will delay the entire project schedule. Dad." "Some things are worth waiting for, son," Edward replied, distractedly. "What did you and Mrs. Iris talk about in private? You never mentioned knowing her before." Edward took a long sip of his drink before answering. "There are many things from my past that you don't know, Theo, and some of them may change all our futures." The storm battered Coral Cove for 3 full days. When it finally subsided, it left a trail of minor damage across the town: damaged roofs, fallen trees, and flooded streets. At the Seabreeze Inn, some coconut trees had toppled, and part of the pool deck was compromised, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. Caleb coordinated the cleanup efforts in the garden, while the guests, tired of confinement, enjoyed the timid sun emerging from the remaining clouds. Rachel, meanwhile, spent hours on the phone, trying to catch up on pending work from New York City. Iris had been strangely quiet since Edward Montgomery's visit. She spent long periods alone in her room or walking on the beach, lost in thought. That morning, after breakfast, she called her children for a conversation in the inn's office. "I've been thinking about Horizon's proposal," she began, when the 3 sat down. "The idea of a partnership seems better to me than a complete sale. We keep the inn running as usual, but we benefit from the resort's infrastructure and marketing." Rachel smiled. "I knew you'd see the positive side, Mom. It's a solution that pleases everyone." "I disagree," Caleb countered, shaking his head. "It might seem like we'll maintain our independence, but soon we'll be following their rules, adapting our inn to the resort's style. In a few years we'll have lost our identity." Iris sighed, massaging her temples. "I understand your concern, son, but also think about the future. The inn is doing well now, but competition increases every year. New inns, hotels, resorts. We don't know what the landscape will be like in 5 or 10 years. "Exactly," Rachel agreed. "Besides, with the partnership, you wouldn't have to worry about the administrative part anymore. Caleb, you could focus on improving the guest experience, which is what you really enjoy doing." Caleb stood up, restless. "I find it incredible how you two have already decided everything. Why did you call me to this meeting? To pretend my opinion matters?" "Of course your opinion matters," Iris tried to calm him. "Nothing is decided yet. I'm just sharing my thoughts. Also reflect on this. Why did Edward Montgomery insist on coming personally? Why the sudden interest in a partnership instead of a purchase? And most importantly, what did you two talk about in private?" Caleb crossed his arms, staring at his mother. "You never mentioned knowing him from Charleston." Iris looked away, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by either of her children. Rachel, usually so focused on business, now also seemed intrigued. "Mom, what's going on?" Rachel asked, softening her tone. "Is there something about Edward Montgomery we need to know?" Iris stood up and walked to the window, watching the sea that was beginning to calm after days of fury. For a moment it seemed she wouldn't answer. When she finally turned to her children, her face showed signs of an internal struggle. "Edward and I met in Charleston over 30 years ago," she began, her voice low but firm. "I worked as a receptionist at one of his family's hotels. We were young. He was graduating in business administration and taking over his father's businesses." She paused, taking a breath. "We fell in love. It was intense but brief. He was engaged to a girl from a traditional family, a marriage practically arranged since childhood. An agreement between families, you understand." "And you broke up because of that?" Rachel asked. "Yes and no. Edward promised to break off the engagement. He said he would face his family for me. I believed him. But then," Iris hesitated, her eyes welling up. "Then what, Mom?" Caleb insisted, approaching. "I found out I was pregnant. When I told him, Edward changed completely. He said he couldn't risk his future, that his family would never accept it. He offered me money to resolve the situation. When I refused, he said he would deny paternity, that I would never be able to prove anything against a Montgomery in Charleston." Rachel brought her hand to her mouth, shocked. "Mom, are you saying that—" "Yes, Rachel. You are Edward Montgomery's daughter." A heavy silence fell over the office. Rachel looked as if she had been struck by lightning, her face alternating between paleness and flush. Caleb was petrified, processing the revelation. "Why did you never tell us?" Caleb finally asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "All these years we thought our father had been a college boyfriend who abandoned us. In your case, Caleb, that's the truth. I met your father, Marcus, when Rachel was 4. He was a good man, but our relationship didn't last. He really did move abroad, as I always told you, so we're half-siblings?" Rachel's voice was almost inaudible. Iris nodded. "I wanted to protect you both. Especially you, Rachel. What good would it do to know that your biological father had rejected me? Rejected the idea of having you as a daughter?" Rachel stood up abruptly. "I need air." Without looking at her mother or brother, she quickly left the office. Caleb remained, his eyes fixed on Iris. "And now Edward Montgomery reappears, coincidentally interested in our inn. He swore he didn't know the inn was mine when Horizon started buying properties here. And you believed him? After everything he did?" Iris shrugged, suddenly looking very tired. "I don't know, son. Maybe yes, maybe no. Anyway, now he knows about Rachel. You told him?" "I didn't have to. He did the math when I mentioned your ages. I saw it in his eyes. He knows Rachel is his daughter." Caleb ran a hand over his face, trying to absorb all the revelations. "And what will he do with that information?" "That's what worries me," Iris admitted. "Edward has always been calculating. If he's interested in Rachel now after all these years, he must have a reason." On the beach, Rachel walked barefoot on the wet sand, the waves occasionally wetting her feet. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. All her life, she had believed her father was a distant ghost who didn't even want to know of her existence. Now she discovered she was the daughter of one of Florida's most powerful businessmen. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Rachel." "It's Theo Montgomery." She froze, her mind making quick connections. Theo, Edward's son, her half-brother. "How did you get my number?" she asked, her voice cold. "It was on the business card you left with the proposal. Sorry to call like this, but I wanted to know how your inn fared through the storm." "We're fine. Some minor damage, nothing serious." "Glad to hear that." There was a pause. "Rachel, actually, I called for another reason. I'd like to talk to you about your interest in working with us at Horizon." "What are you talking about?" "I never expressed interest in working for you. My father mentioned you have marketing experience, work for a multinational. He thought you might be interested in returning to Florida, taking on an executive position here. As part of the agreement with the inn, of course." Rachel felt a chill. Edward Montgomery was already trying to manipulate her, using Theo as an intermediary. "I need to think about it. It's not a good time right now." "Of course, I understand. How about dinner tomorrow night? I know an excellent restaurant in town. We can discuss the possibilities without pressure." She hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately, but another part, a part she didn't know existed until that moment, was curious about the Montgomery family. Her biological family. "All right. Tomorrow night," she finally agreed. Back at the inn, Iris was at the reception attending to a couple of guests when her phone rang. Edward's number appeared on the screen. She answered with a knot in her stomach. "Iris, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "About what, Edward?" "Horizon's proposal. You know very well it's not just about that. It's about Rachel." Iris moved to a more private corner. "We already talked about this 30 years ago. You made your position very clear back then. Things are different now. I want to meet my daughter. She is not your daughter. You forfeited that right when you sent me away from Charleston. I made a mistake, Iris. I was young, scared, pressured by family. We all make mistakes. Some mistakes can't be fixed, Edward. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an inn to run." She hung up before he could reply, her heart pounding. She needed to find Rachel, tell her about the call before Edward tried a direct approach. However, when she reached the beach, she only saw Caleb returning from a walk. "Did you see your sister?" "She was walking on the beach, but I didn't see her come back." "Why? Did something happen?" "Edward just called me. He wants to meet Rachel, claim paternity after all these years." Caleb frowned. "And this has to do with Horizon's proposal. Is he using the business to get close to Rachel?" "I don't know, son. But I know Edward well enough to know he never does anything without a calculated reason. And that worries me." What they didn't know was that at that exact moment, Rachel was in her room researching everything she could find online about Edward Montgomery and Horizon developments. On her screen, a recent photo showed Edward next to Theo at a corporate event. The resemblance between father and son was striking. And looking at the photo, Rachel noticed for the first time how her own eyes and jawline resembled Edward's. For the first time in years, tears streamed down Rachel's face as she stared at the image of the man who was her biological father, a stranger who now threatened to turn her life and that of her entire family upside down. The Lighthouse Point Bistro was the most elegant restaurant in Coral Cove, built on a small elevation offering panoramic sea views. That night, Rachel arrived promptly at 8, wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress, her hair loose in soft waves, a look very different from her usual executive attire. Theo was already waiting for her at a table on the veranda. Seeing her, he stood up with a smile, noting how different she looked. More relaxed, more like the local women than the New York City executive he had met days ago. "You look beautiful," he complimented, pulling out the chair for her to sit. "Thank you," Rachel replied succinctly. Her eyes scanned the room, noticing that the restaurant was relatively empty for a Friday night. "I imagined it would be busier. I reserved a few tables around us to ensure our privacy," Theo explained, gesturing for the waiter to bring the wine he had already selected. "We have a lot to talk about." The waiter served 2 glasses of white wine. Rachel took a small sip, observing Theo over the glass. Now that she knew the truth, she couldn't help but look for similarities between them. Were they half-siblings after all? But she saw no common features, except perhaps the upright posture and confident manner they both possessed. "So," she began, placing the glass on the table, "you mentioned a position at Horizon. I'm curious to know more." Theo smiled, straight to the point like a true executive. "I like that." He leaned forward. "Horizon is expanding rapidly. The resort in Coral Cove is just the beginning. We have projects planned for the entire Florida coast. We need someone with your experience to direct regional marketing." "How do you know about my experience?" "I never talked about my work in detail. We researched LinkedIn industry reports. You have an impressive reputation in digital marketing." Rachel nodded slowly. The explanation made sense, but something in the way Theo avoided her gaze made her suspicious. "And what exactly would my role be?" "Regional marketing director, reporting directly to me and my father. Office in Charleston, with frequent visits to projects under development. Salary 30% higher than you currently earn in New York City, plus profit sharing." Rachel raised her eyebrows. It was an extremely generous offer, too generous for someone they barely knew. "Why me?" "There must be dozens of qualified professionals in Charleston, people who already know the local market." Theo took a long sip of wine before answering. "My father believes that you would fit well into the company culture." "Your father?" Rachel gave a dry laugh. "It's interesting how he seems so suddenly interested in me." The waiter arrived with the main courses, grilled fish for her, passion fruit shrimp for him. When they were alone again, Theo seemed uncomfortable. "Rachel, there's something I need to ask." "It's personal." She cut a piece of fish, not answering, waiting for him to continue. "My father has been acting strangely since he met your family, especially after being alone with your mother that day. Do you know if there's some history between them?" Rachel considered her options. Should she tell the truth, or wait to see where this situation would lead her? "Why do you think there would be something between them?" She countered, avoiding a direct answer. "Because I've never seen my father so obsessed with a negotiation. Usually he leaves the details to the executives like me. But this time he's personally involved in every step." Theo paused. "And there's more." "Last night I overheard him on the phone. He mentioned something about rights and responsibilities. When I asked who he was talking to, he said it was with the lawyers about the inn's acquisition. But it didn't sound like a business conversation." Rachel felt a chill. Edward Montgomery was plotting something related to her. She was sure of it now. "Theo, what do you know about your father's past relationships?" "Before his marriage to your mother?" He seemed surprised by the question. "Almost nothing. My parents married young, a traditional marriage between families." "Why?" "Curiosity," she replied vaguely. "In my family, it was always just the 3 of us. My brother, my mother, and me. I find families with history, tradition fascinating. How did your mother and your father meet? Theo asked. Actually, my father. The man I considered my father all my life. He and my mother separated even before I was born. Rachel surprised herself with her honesty. I grew up without a father figure. I'm sorry, Theo said, sounding genuinely compassionate. That must have been difficult. I had my mother and my brother. We formed a strong family despite the absences. They continued dinner, the conversation flowing to lighter topics. Life in New York City, the natural beauty of Coral Cove, future plans. Rachel was surprised to realize she was enjoying Theo's company. He was intelligent, articulate, with a subtle sense of humor that made her smile. He didn't seem at all like the calculating businessman she had initially imagined. After dessert, a delicious coconut pudding with passion fruit sauce, Theo suggested a stroll on the deck that extended from the restaurant's veranda to a small cove. The night was clear, the starry sky reflecting on the tranquil surface of the sea. They walked side by side in silence, each lost in their own thoughts when they spotted a couple further ahead. Even at a distance, Rachel immediately recognized her mother's silhouette. That's, Theo began, stopping abruptly. My mother, Rachel confirmed. And that man next to her is my father, Theo completed, surprise evident in his voice. The two watched, partially hidden by the shadows. Iris and Edward were talking intensely, her gestures animated, as if she were arguing about something important. At one point, Edward gently held her arm, saying something that made Iris stop and look at him with an expression difficult to decipher, even from a distance. I think we should leave, Rachel whispered, pulling Theo by the arm. I don't want them to see us. They quickly returned to the restaurant, gathered their things and left through the main entrance. I can give you a ride home, Theo offered, indicating his parked car nearby. I prefer a taxi. Thank you. Rachel, Theo lightly held her hand. I don't know what's going on between our parents, but I want you to know that my job offer is genuine. I believe you would be an excellent addition to our team. She nodded, thanked him politely and got into the taxi the valet had called. On the way back to the inn, her mind was buzzing with questions. What was her mother doing with Edward Montgomery at that hour of the night? What were they talking about so intensely? Arriving at the inn, she found Caleb on the veranda, a glass of rum in his hand, watching the sea. How was dinner with Prince Charming? He asked ironically. Interesting, Rachel replied, sitting next to her brother. He offered me a job at Horizon. A high position, impressive salary. And you're going to accept? Caleb's voice held a hint of apprehension. I don't know. I need to understand what's happening first. She hesitated before continuing. I saw Mom with Edward Montgomery on the restaurant deck. They seemed to be having an intense conversation. Caleb straightened in his chair. Mom said she was going to town to handle some bank matters. Well, I guess the matters had a first and last name. The two remained silent for a few minutes, each absorbing the implications of that discovery. Caleb, Rachel finally broke the silence. Do you think she still has feelings for him? After everything he did? I don't know, Rachel. The heart is a complicated thing, and ultimately they share a history. And a daughter. Rachel shivered at hearing that. She still hadn't gotten used to the idea that Edward Montgomery was her biological father. And how do you feel about it? Caleb asked. Discovering that your father is alive, rich, and apparently interested in being part of your life now? Confused, annoyed, curious, all at once, she sighed. For 32 years, I grew up believing my father was a distant ghost who didn't even want to know of my existence. Now I find out he's practically the most powerful man in the region, that he has another son who technically is my half-brother, and that he's offering me everything I've always wanted professionally. And you believe in this sudden change of heart? Of course not. Edward Montgomery does nothing without an ulterior motive. What I can't understand is what that motive would be after so many years. At that moment, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Iris got out, thanked the driver. It wasn't Edward. They noticed with relief and walked to the veranda, seeming surprised to find her two children awake. I thought you'd be asleep by now, she commented, avoiding Rachel's direct gaze. We were waiting for you, Caleb replied. I thought you went to the bank. Iris hesitated for an instant. Yes, but then I met... An old friend for coffee. An old friend named Edward Montgomery. Rachel's voice was sharp. Iris paled. How did you... I saw you on the deck of the Lighthouse Point Bistro. I was having dinner there with Theo. You had dinner with Theo Montgomery? It was Iris's turn to look surprised. Yes, he offered me a job at Horizon. Interesting how the Montgomerys seem suddenly fascinated by our family, don't you think? Iris sat heavily in a chair. She looked exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. It's not what you're thinking, she began. Edward wanted to talk about Rachel, about making up for lost time. And what exactly does that mean? Caleb asked. He wants to legally recognize her as his daughter. Give her the Montgomery surname. Include her in his will as a legitimate heir along with Theo. Rachel felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. What? I told him it was too late for that you already had your life built, your identity formed, but he insists it's your right. My right? Rachel stood up, indignant. What about my feelings? Did anyone consider how I feel about all this? Rachel, I just wanted to protect you, Iris tried to explain, both before when I hid the truth and now trying to convince Edward not to complicate your life. But it's my life, Mom. My choice, not yours, not his. Rachel was almost shouting now. All these years, you decided for me what I should know, how I should feel, and now he does the same, suddenly deciding he wants to be my father after 30 years. Daughter, please understand. No! Rachel raised her hand, interrupting her. I don't want any more explanations, no more excuses. I want the complete truth once and for all. And then I want everyone, you, Edward, Theo, everyone, to let me decide what to do with that truth. With that, Rachel turned and walked towards the beach, ignoring Iris's and Caleb's calls. She needed to be alone, to process everything she had discovered, everything that was still to come. On the veranda, Iris broke down in tears. Caleb, torn between following his sister and comforting his mother, chose to stay. Embracing Iris, he asked in a low voice, Mom, what does Edward really want? This can't just be about recognizing Rachel as his daughter after all these years. Iris wiped away her tears, her gaze lost on the dark horizon where the sea merged with the night sky. He's sick, Caleb. Very sick. He has only a few months to live, according to the doctors. The news of Edward Montgomery's illness fell like a stone into the calm lake that was the Reynolds family's life. Caleb, even with all the resentment towards the man who had abandoned his mother and half-sister so many years ago, couldn't help but feel a pang of compassion. How long does he have? He asked, observing his mother's tired face. 6 months, maybe less, Iris replied, drying the last tears. It's a rare type of cancer, already in an advanced stage when it was discovered. The best doctors in the country confirmed the diagnosis. And Theo knows this? No, Iris shook her head. Edward doesn't want his son to know yet. He says he's waiting for the right moment. Caleb frowned. But he wants Rachel to know. How ironic. He didn't want anyone to know, actually. It was an accident. We were talking about Horizon's proposal, and he had an episode, a sudden weakness. I had to help him sit down. That's when he told me after I insisted. Iris paused. I think he needed to confide in someone who wasn't immediate family. And does that change anything for you, Mom? Your feelings for him? Iris looked out at the sea for a long time before answering. I thought that after 30 years there was nothing left. That time had healed all wounds. But seeing him again stirred up things I thought were buried forever. You still love him. So it wasn't a question, but a statement. I don't know if it's love. Caleb, it's more complicated than that. We share a history. We created a life together, even if he didn't participate. There's a connection that never completely disappeared. Caleb nodded in silence. It was difficult for him to fully understand, but he respected his mother's feelings. What does he really want from Rachel, Mom? The truth. To settle accounts with the past before he leaves. To meet the daughter he never had the courage to acknowledge and... Iris hesitated. And to ensure she gets her share of the Montgomery inheritance. Apparently it's a considerable fortune. Caleb gave a bitter laugh. Money? In the end, it's always about money. Not for Edward, not this time. He seems genuinely remorseful for what he did, Caleb. The proximity of the end has a way of clarifying people's priorities. They remained silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Caleb spoke. Someone needs to find Rachel. She shouldn't be alone after all this. I'll look for her, Iris said, standing up. No, Mom, let me. I think now she needs a brother, not a mother. Iris nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her son's words. Caleb always had a special sensitivity for the feelings of others, a characteristic that made him excellent at his work at the inn, taking care of guests. Caleb knew exactly where to find Rachel. There was a small promontory about a mile from the inn, accessible only by a narrow trail between the rocks. Since childhood, it was the place they went when they needed to think, to be alone, or simply to escape their mother's scolding. And there she was, sitting on the largest rock, hugging her knees to her chest, watching the immensity of the ocean under the starry sky. May I join you? Caleb asked, approaching cautiously. Rachel merely shrugged, not looking at her brother, but moved slightly to the side, making space. They remained silent for several minutes, just listening to the constant rhythm of the waves against the rocks below. Finally, Rachel spoke. Do you remember when we used to come here to share secrets? Things we didn't want Mom to know? Caleb smiled. Like the time you secretly took her car to impress that boy from school and hit the lamppost in the town square. Or when you broke Grandma's porcelain vase and blamed the neighbor's cat. The two laughed, the sound of their laughter mixing with the noise of the waves. We were so close, Rachel continued, her smile fading. Then I went to New York City. I drifted away. I became this person obsessed with work, success, professional recognition. You just followed your path, Rachel, just as I followed mine, staying here. But what if my path was shaped by this absence I didn't even know existed? What if I spent all these years seeking professional approval because I never had a father's approval? Caleb put his arm around his sister's shoulders. It doesn't matter what shaped us, Rachel. What matters is who we became despite it. And you became an incredible woman, strong, independent, determined. No one can take that away from you, not even Edward Montgomery. Rachel rested her head on her brother's shoulder, as she did when they were children. He's sick, Rachel, Caleb said softly. Edward is dying. Rachel straightened up, turning to look at her brother in astonishment. What? How do you know that? Caleb recounted what Iris had told him, observing Rachel's expressions change from initial surprise to something more complex, a mixture of confusion, anger, and surprisingly sadness. So that's why, she murmured. That's why the rush to recognize me, to include me in the family. It seems so. And Theo doesn't know? According to Mom, no. Rachel stood up abruptly, walking to the edge of the promontory, looking out at the dark sea below. What a mess, she said, more to herself than to Caleb. What an absolute mess. What are you going to do? I don't know. She turned to face him. Part of me wants to tell Edward Montgomery to go to hell, to say he lost the right to be my father 30 years ago. Another part wants to meet him, to understand who he is, where you come from, Caleb completed, understanding perfectly. It's crazy, isn't it? After everything he did to Mom, to me? It's not crazy, Rachel. It's human. We all want to understand our origins, to know where we come from. And Theo, he's my brother Caleb, my half-brother. And he has no idea. We were having dinner together today, talking about work, about life, and all the while I knew something fundamental about him that he doesn't even know himself. Are you going to tell him? I don't know if I have that right. I don't know if I have the right to do anything in this situation, actually. Caleb stood up, joining her at the edge of the promontory. You have the right to choose your own path, Rachel. Not what Mum wants, not what Edward wants. What you want. Rachel looked at her brother with tear-filled eyes. What if I don't know what I want? Then give yourself time to figure it out. You don't have to make any decisions tonight. The two siblings hugged, finding comfort in each other as in the old days. When they finally returned to the inn, Iris had already retired, leaving only a note on the kitchen table. I love you both more than anything. I trust the decisions you make. The next morning, Rachel woke up early and went to find her mother, who was already on the veranda with her usual cup of coffee, watching the sunrise over the sea. Can we talk? Rachel asked, sitting next to Iris. Of course, daughter. I want to know everything about you and Edward. How you met, how you fell in love, everything. Don't omit any details this time. Iris nodded, placing the cup on the table. I was 22 when I started working at the Grand Ocean Hotel in Charleston. I was a night shift receptionist while studying business administration during the day. Edward frequented the hotel for business meetings. His family owned several businesses in the city, including a stake in the hotel itself. Iris smiled as she remembered. He always stopped to talk to me. At first, they were just polite professional conversations. But over time, we started discussing books, music, movies. We discovered we had more in common than it seemed at first glance. How did you start dating? He invited me for coffee after my shift one night. He said he needed help choosing a gift for his sister. We went to a bookstore that stayed open late. We ended up talking for hours. Iris paused, her eyes lost in memories. It was so easy, so natural. After that night, we met whenever possible. Did you know he was engaged? Not at first. When I found out, I wanted to end everything. But he swore the engagement was just a family arrangement, that there was no love involved, that he would break everything off for me. Iris sighed. I was young, I was in love, I believed him. And then you got pregnant. Yes, it was unexpected, scary and wonderful at the same time. When I told Edward, for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. It was no longer a forbidden romance, an exciting secret. Suddenly there were real consequences, and he rejected you. Not immediately. First he tried to convince me to terminate the pregnancy. When I categorically refused, he offered money for me to disappear, have the baby away from Charleston and never look for him again. When I also refused that, he became furious. He said he would deny everything, that no one would believe me against his family, that I would lose my job and never work in Charleston again. What did you do? I took the money I had saved, some clothes, and left. First to inland Florida, where I stayed until you were born. Then I started moving down the coast, working in small inns, beach hotels until we reached Coral Cove. I fell in love with the place, and the rest you already know. Edward never tried to find you? Not that I know of. If he tried, he didn't try very hard. Iris took a sip of her coffee. Rachel, I know you must be angry with both of us, with me for hiding the truth, with him for abandoning us. But I want you to understand, Edward is not a monster. He was a scared young man, pressured by his family, by impossible expectations. That doesn't justify what he did. No, it doesn't justify. But it explains, and maybe it helps you understand why he's doing what he's doing now. Rachel remained silent for a long moment. Do you think I should meet him? As my father? Iris held her daughter's hand. That's a decision only you can make, daughter. But know that whatever you decide, I will support you. At that moment, Rachel's phone rang. It was Theo. Rachel, I'm at Coral Cove Central Hospital. My father suffered a collapse this morning. He's stabilized, but his voice faltered. The doctors want to talk to me about his condition. It seems serious. I know it's a strange request, but could you come? I'm here alone. Rachel looked at her mother, who had heard the conversation on speakerphone. Iris nodded slightly. I'm on my way, Theo, Rachel replied, already standing up. I'll be there in 30 minutes. When she hung up, Iris looked at her with concern. Are you sure about this? No, Rachel answered honestly. But if I don't go now, I might never have the chance. At the hospital, Rachel found Theo in the waiting room, looking younger and more vulnerable in his wrinkled shirt and worried expression. When he saw her, he quickly stood up. Thank you for coming, he said, gratitude evident in his voice. I know it's a strange request, considering we barely know each other. It's not strange, Rachel replied, surprising herself with the sincerity in her voice. How is your father? Stable for now. The doctors are running more tests. Theo ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture. The strange thing is that when I checked him in, the nurse commented that my father has been coming here regularly in recent weeks. But he never mentioned being sick. Maybe he didn't want to worry you. Maybe, but my father has never hidden anything from me before. Theo seemed genuinely confused. We're very close. We always have been. Since my mother passed away 10 years ago, it's just been the two of us. Rachel felt a pang of, could it be jealousy? Of the close relationship Theo had with the father she never knew? Before she could explore that feeling, a doctor approached them. Mr. Montgomery, can we talk about your father's condition? Theo looked at Rachel, hesitant. Can she stay? She's a close family friend. The doctor nodded and led the two into a small consultation room. What he revealed in the following minutes confirmed what Iris had already told them. Edward Montgomery suffered from a rare and aggressive cancer, already in a terminal stage. That morning's collapse was just a symptom of the disease's progression. How much time does he have? Theo asked, his voice almost inaudible. It's hard to say precisely, but based on the progression rate, perhaps a few weeks at most. Theo paled, gripping the arm of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Rachel, moved by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, covered his hand with hers. Why didn't he tell me? Theo asked, more to himself than to the doctor. Why face this alone? Your father asked me to be present when you go to see him, the doctor said. He has something important to tell you, and he wants me to be there. I think to confirm the veracity of what he's going to say. Theo and Rachel exchanged confused glances. What could be so important that Edward needed a doctor to validate it? When they entered the room, Edward was sitting in bed, looking frail but conscious. His eyes lit up when he saw Theo, but when he noticed Rachel right behind, an expression of surprise and then understanding crossed his face. I see you brought company, Edward said, his voice weaker than Rachel remembered hearing days ago. This is Rachel Reynolds. Dad, she's the daughter of the owner of the Seabreeze Inn, remember? Edward nodded slowly. Yes, of course, Rachel. His eyes fixed on her for a long moment. Thank you for coming. The doctor said you have something important to tell me, Theo said, approaching the bed. What's going on, Dad? Why did you hide your illness from me? Edward looked at the doctor, who nodded subtly, and then at Rachel. Perhaps it's best if you wait outside for this conversation, he said to Rachel. No, she replied firmly. I think I need to hear this too. Edward seemed surprised, but after a moment a faint smile appeared on his lips. Determined like your mother, he murmured. Then turning to Theo, Son, there's something I needed to tell you a long time ago, but I never found the courage. Now that my time is running out, I can't put it off any longer. Edward paused, taking a breath. Theo, you have a sister. A half-sister, to be precise. Theo looked at his father, confused. What? What do you mean? Before I met your mother, I had a relationship with a young woman in Charleston. When she became pregnant, I abandoned her. I denied responsibility, offered her money to disappear. It was the biggest mistake of my life, a mistake that has haunted me all these years. Theo looked stunned. Are you telling me I have a sister somewhere out there? Someone I've never known? Yes. Edward looked directly at Rachel, his gaze intense. And she's in this room now. Theo's eyes followed his father's gaze, landing on Rachel. Understanding slowly dawned on his features. The silence that followed Edward's revelation seemed eternal. Theo looked from Rachel to his father and back to her, his expression changing from initial confusion to understanding and finally to something Rachel couldn't fully interpret, a mixture of surprise, hurt and perhaps a spark of hope. You're my sister? Theo's voice was almost a whisper. Rachel nodded slowly, unable to find adequate words for that moment. How long have you known about this? He asked, a tone of accusation creeping into his voice. I only found out a few days ago. My mother told me after you appeared at the inn, Rachel replied, keeping her voice calm despite the storm of emotions she felt. Theo turned to his father, the hurt clearly visible in his eyes. And you? How long have you known she's your daughter? Edward took a deep breath, the effort evident on his pale face. I always knew of a daughter's existence, but reconnecting with Iris after so many years, seeing Rachel, a grown woman, knowing she was my daughter, it was like being hit by the truth of all my mistakes at once. Is that why the sudden interest in the inn? Is that why you asked me to offer her a job? Theo stood up abruptly, pacing the room, unable to contain his agitation. Was it all a plan to get close to her? It wasn't quite like that, son. When we identified the inn as the last property we needed to acquire for the resort, I genuinely didn't know it belonged to Iris. It was only when I saw the surname Reynolds on the documents. I did some research and discovered it was her. So yes, I admit I used the business as an excuse to get closer, to get to know Rachel. You should have told me, Theo said, his voice choked. So you should have trusted me. I wanted to, Theo. But how do you tell the son you're proud of, the person he's become, a son you love more than anything, that you abandoned another child? How do you confess such a magnitude of cowardice? Rachel, who had until then observed the interaction in silence, approached Edward's bed. Why now? Why not 5 years ago or 10? Why wait until you're dying? Edward looked at her, his tired eyes meeting hers. Because I was a coward, Rachel. Simple as that. A coward who was afraid to face the consequences of his actions, afraid of judgment, afraid of losing the respect of the son he had. He paused, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. The prospect of death has a curious way of putting things into perspective. The doctor, who had observed the entire conversation in silence, approached. Mr. Montgomery, perhaps it's best to continue this conversation later. Your father needs to rest. No, Edward said firmly. I don't know how many laters I have left. I need to say everything now. The doctor hesitated but eventually nodded. 15 minutes then. Not a minute more. When the doctor left, Edward continued. I want to correct as much as possible the mistakes I made. Rachel, I know I can't be a father to you. It's too late for that. But I would like you to know that I am very proud of the woman you have become. Even without my presence, or perhaps precisely because of it, you have become a strong, independent, successful person. Rachel felt a lump in her throat. All her life she had dreamed of such words coming from the father she had never known. And Theo, Edward turned to his son, you are the best man I know. You have always been my pride, my joy. But your life would be even richer with a sister by your side. You two together can achieve things I can't even imagine. How convenient, Dad, Theo said with a bitter laugh, only realizing the value of family when you're about to leave us. You're right, Edward agreed, surprising the two young people. It's convenient, it's selfish, wanting to fix everything now at the end, to leave in peace. It's another act of selfishness on my part. He sighed deeply. But selfish or not, it's the truth, and both of you deserve the truth, however belated and inadequate it may be. Rachel looked at Theo, noticing the internal struggle he was waging. He was hurt, confused, betrayed, feelings she knew well. Moved by an impulse she didn't fully understand, she reached out and gently touched his arm. I just found out all this too. Theo, I'm as lost as you are. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Rachel saw the same fear, the same uncertainty she felt reflected in his gaze. You both have every right to hate me, Edward said, his voice weak, to reject what I'm proposing. But I ask that you at least consider getting to know each other, giving each other a chance. Not for me, but for yourselves. At that moment, the doctor returned, indicating that time was up. Theo, clearly needing space to process everything, mumbled something about getting coffee and quickly left the room. Rachel stayed behind, looking at the frail man in the bed, her biological father, a stranger with whom she shared blood and DNA. I'm sorry it had to be this way, Edward said when they were alone. It wasn't how I imagined it would be. How did you imagine it then? Rachel asked, unable to completely hide the bitterness in her voice. Honestly, I never had the courage to imagine. For years I tried not to think about you, about the child I abandoned. It was easier to move on pretending you didn't exist. He paused, running a hand over his tired face. But you existed. You grew up. You became someone. And now, when I finally had the courage to look for you, it's too late. Rachel felt unexpected tears forming in her eyes. Why didn't you come back? After I was born, when you saw that my mother really had the baby, why didn't you try to find us? Because I was afraid, Rachel. Afraid to face what I had done. Afraid of the consequences, afraid of disappointing my family. And then came the shame, and the more time passed, the harder it became. How do you explain abandoning a daughter for years? He looked at her, his eyes moist. There are no excuses sufficient for what I did. I can only say I'm deeply sorry. Something in the sincerity of his words, in the vulnerability of his state, touched Rachel in a way she didn't expect. All the anger she had felt and still felt was momentarily overshadowed by an unexpected compassion. I'll need time, she said finally, to process all this, to decide what it means to me. Of course, Edward replied. Time is something I don't have much of anymore, but you have a whole life ahead of you. Use it well. When Rachel left the room, she found Theo in the corridor, leaning against the wall, staring into space. He hadn't gone for coffee after all. How much did you hear? She asked. Enough, Theo replied. He straightened up, seeming to have made a decision. Look, I don't know how to deal with all this right now. My father is dying. I found out I have a sister. It's a lot to process. I understand. But I know it's not your fault, and I think I'd like to get to know you regardless of the circumstances. Rachel felt a small but genuine smile form on her lips. I'd like that too, Theo. The following week passed in a blur for Rachel. Edward was transferred to his home in Charleston, where a team of doctors and nurses cared for him full-time. Theo drove daily between Coral Cove and Charleston, divided between Horizon's business and his ailing father. Rachel returned to the inn, where Caleb and Iris eagerly awaited news. She told them about the hospital meeting, the revelation of the truth to Theo, Edward's weakened state. "And how are you feeling about all this?" Caleb asked, always attentive to his sister's emotional well-being. Confused, sad, angry, relieved, all at once, Rachel admitted. Seeing him there, so frail. It's hard to maintain the anger I thought I'd feel. "Forgiveness is not something we do for others, daughter," Iris said softly. "It's something we do for ourselves." On the afternoon of the 5th day after the revelation, Theo appeared at the inn. He looked exhausted, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a face marked by worry. "My father is asking to see you," he said to Rachel, without preamble. "The doctors say he's worsening rapidly." Rachel looked at her mother, seeking, "What, permission?" "Guidance, go," Iris said. "You might regret it if you don't." The trip to Charleston was silent. Theo drove focused on the road, and Rachel watched the landscape from the window, her thoughts a storm. Occasionally they exchanged comments about the weather, about traffic, safe, neutral topics that didn't demand emotional vulnerability. When they arrived at the Montgomery mansion, Rachel was surprised by the grandeur of the place, an imposing property in an exclusive Charleston neighborhood, with sea views and extensive gardens. A completely different life from the one she and Iris had had. "He's in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor, Theo explained, leading her through corridors decorated with artworks and antiques that seemed worth fortunes. Edward was awake, but visibly more debilitated than the last time Rachel had seen him. His eyes, however, lit up when she entered the room. "You came," he said, his voice just a whisper. "I came," Rachel confirmed, approaching the bed. Theo discreetly left the room, leaving them alone. "Thank you," Edward said. "I know I don't deserve your presence, but it means a lot to me." Rachel sat in the chair beside the bed. "I'm not sure why I came. I'm still trying to understand my own feelings." "That's fair," Edward nodded. "Rachel, there's something important I need to tell you. Something practical." He paused, taking a breath. "My lawyer will come later. I've modified my will. You and Theo will receive equal shares of my fortune and businesses." Rachel shook her head. "I don't want your money, Edward." "It was never why—" "I know," he interrupted her. "I know it's not about the money. But it's your right. And more than that, it's a way to ensure that you and Theo remain connected after I'm gone. The family businesses will require you to work together, to get to know each other, to build a relationship. It's manipulative, you know?" Rachel said with a short, humorless laugh. "To tie our lives together like that." "Undoubtedly," Edward agreed with a small smile. "I was always a strategist, after all." They remained silent for a few moments. "There's one more thing," Edward continued. "The proposal for your mother's inn. I want you to know it was genuine. The resort plan is real, and the partnership with the Seabreeze Inn makes commercial sense regardless of our personal connection. Do you really think we could separate things like that?" "I don't know, but I think it would be worth trying. Your mother built something special at that inn, and Caleb obviously loves it. It would be a shame to see all that lost." Rachel considered his words. "I'll talk to them. But the final decision will be theirs, not mine." "That's fair," Edward agreed. They spent the next hour talking about Rachel's life, her professional achievements, her dreams for the future. Edward listened attentively, asking questions, occasionally offering advice. It was strange and surprisingly natural at the same time, as if they were trying to make up for decades of lost conversations in just a few hours. When Rachel finally said goodbye, Edward held her hand. "We won't see each other again, will we?" he asked, his eyes showing he already knew the answer. "Probably not," Rachel replied honestly, "but I'm glad we had this conversation." "Me too, daughter." "Me too." On the drive back to Coral Cove, Theo and Rachel talked more openly. He told her about his childhood, about the mother he had lost 10 years ago, about how he had always missed having siblings. I never imagined my wish would come true this way, he admitted with a half-smile. Life rarely follows the scripts we imagine, Rachel replied. When they arrived at the inn, it was late at night. To Rachel's surprise, Theo accepted the invitation to come in for coffee. On the veranda of the Seabreeze Inn, under the starry sky, and with the sound of the waves in the background, Rachel, Theo, Caleb, and Iris sat together. A strange, improvised family, connected by ties of blood, choice, and circumstance. I've been thinking a lot about the partnership proposal, Iris said, breaking the silence. I think it could work with the right terms. Caleb looked at his mother, surprised. Seriously? I thought you were leaning towards rejecting it. I changed my mind, Iris replied simply. People do that, you know. The idea would be to maintain the essence of the Seabreeze Inn, Theo explained. Its charm, its individuality. The resort would be built around it, complementing, not replacing. What about the employees? Caleb asked, still skeptical. Everyone would keep their jobs with the same or better salaries, Theo assured. In fact, we would need to hire more people. The conversation continued late into the night, discussing possibilities, plans, visions for the future. At one point, Iris and Caleb retired, leaving the half-siblings alone on the veranda. It's strange to think we have the same blood, Theo commented, looking out at the sea. That we're family. It is, Rachel agreed, but it's also comforting in a way, to know there's a connection there, something that cannot be denied or erased. Do you think we can really make this work? The partnership, working together, being siblings? Rachel smiled. I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. 3 months later, the Seabreeze Inn was undergoing extensive renovations. Following the partnership agreement signed between Horizon Developments and the Reynolds family, the chalets were being carefully updated, maintaining their rustic charm, but gaining more comfort and modernity. Edward Montgomery did not live to see the start of the works. He passed away peacefully at his home in Charleston, 2 weeks after his meeting with Rachel. At his funeral, discreet and elegant as he had requested, Rachel stood beside Theo, offering the silent support only a sister could give. The resort project was progressing rapidly. Theo, now president of Horizon, worked closely with Caleb, respecting his ideas and vision for the inn. Rachel, who had accepted the position of marketing director, divided her time between New York City and Coral Cove, gradually moving her life closer to her family. On a Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the storm that had changed the course of their lives, the family gathered on the inn's veranda. Iris, Caleb, Rachel, and Theo shared stories, laughter, and plans for the future as they watched the sun set over the sea. Do you believe in destiny? Iris asked suddenly. What do you mean? Caleb questioned. I wonder if all this, the storm, the resort proposal, the reunion with Edward, wasn't in some way predestined to happen. I don't know if I believe in destiny, Rachel replied thoughtfully, but I believe that sometimes life takes us exactly where we need to be, even if the path is winding and painful. And where we needed to be was here, Theo asked with a small smile. Exactly here, Rachel confirmed, looking at the people who now formed her family, an unusual, imperfect but true family. Together despite everything. On the horizon, where the sky met the sea, the first stars began to appear. A new night, a new beginning. A future full of possibilities that they would build together, not despite their complicated past, but strengthened by it.